how's it going? So today we're going to look at episode 7 of season 2 of House of the Dragon. Okay, so this episode picks up exactly where we left off at the end of episode 6, and we have this meeting on the beach between Rhaenyra and Addam, and obviously we have Syrax and Sea Smoke there. And visually stunning. We expected as much. We've seen this clip in a couple of the trailers. Obviously at the end of the last episode we seen that she was flying off with the concern that, you know, she had no idea who had claimed this dragon. She tried to get a rider for him in the last episode with Sir Stephen Darklyn, and obviously that was not very successful and ended very poorly for both him and the Dragonkeeper involved. So, you know, that might have prompted some later decisions in the episode with other Dragonkeepers. But we see that, you know, at the end of episode 6, she storms out, she doesn't consult her council, she takes Syrax, she goes straight out on Dragonback to try and find who it is that's claimed this dragon that she calls a dragon of House Targaryen, which we discussed in the trailer breakdown. So, you know, essentially I had some gripes with this because, you know, there's this whole notion that, you know, we don't control the dragons, and within that is also the paradigm that they are their own beast. They have no masters. They can't be owned by a particular house, even though the house may have the hubris to feel justified in claiming that they do own them. So I think it's a very interesting concept that is being presented to us, but one that I think is, you know, very limited in its scope, and it kind of shows that she has become a bit disillusioned from the fact that these are independent creatures who are unpredictable in the same way that those within her household are. So in this encounter we see that she meets Addam for the first time, and again, like we said in the last episode, she had no idea who it was. She was even considering that it might have been someone on the side of the Greens. So she pulls up on the beach and Sea Smoke and Addam come and join her to treat with her. We see that immediately, you know, she is very hostile. She is looking to see what Addam's intentions are, what he wants now that he has, you know, claimed this feat of power. And he makes it very clear that his allegiance is with her, that he didn't pursue this dragon, that the dragon actually pursued him. And he, you know, illustrates that he has been toiling in service to House Velaryon, that, you know, he is of her side anyways, that he needs no convincing. And then she asks of his parentage, and now he says his mother was a shipwright. It's unclear where they're going to go with this, because obviously in a later scene we do see that the question of their mother and her parentage comes up, so we shall see what they do with that. But he says his mother's a shipwright, and then he said his father is of no consequence. Now this would have been the perfect opportunity for him to tell her who his father is, and, you know, it would have been much easier for him because she would have probably trusted him a lot easier. But it seems like they make quite a good first impression with each other. So she ends up asking, can you fly him back to Dragonstone with me? And he says he'll try. Then we join Alicent in the Red Keep, and she is with Maester Orwyle, and she's, you know, getting her arm, the cut on her arm that she received during the food riot in the last episode, she's getting it seen to and cleaned. And it's very, very reminiscent to when Rhaenyra was getting her cut that Alicent delivered her in season 1. Orwyle says, it's going to scar, but it will heal and you'll be able to hide it. And Rhaenyra gets a very similar line delivered in season 1, where, you know, they say, you're going to be left with a scar, but it will heal, don't worry. Again, kind of reflecting the experience of these two characters and bringing together these similarities between them, but also highlighting, you know, the cause and effect. Like, this happened to Rhaenyra as a result of Alicent, and this happened to Alicent as a result of Rhaenyra and her, you know, encouraging these food riots within King's Landing. But one of them was intentional and the other was not. She just caught up in them. So it's very interesting to see, but you can tell that Alicent is she's very distant in this scene, and you can tell that she's getting more and more disillusioned with royal life in the capital and at the Red Keep, when she is at the mercy of all the men surrounding her, particularly her son, who refuses to listen to her and has just dismissed her from her seat of power that she's occupied for the last sizable amount of time. So she's very lost. And we see this then whenever she speaks with her Kingsguard member that's signed her, and she says that she wants to go out. She wants to go out to the Kingswood. She doesn't want any of her handmaidens there. She doesn't want anyone else. She just wants him and her to go to the Kingswood. She needs some time away from the Red Keep. To which Sir Rickard Thorne obliges and agrees that he'll take her. We then get this really interesting scene between Larys and Ironrod, and they're on the balcony overlooking the courtyard in the Red Keep, where Aemond is sending the other two Kingsguard that were at the food riot scene. He's sending them to the wall, essentially saying that they have, incited the riot because of the violence that they inflicted on the small folk. And, as much as that may be the case, and maybe he's trying to be notable and championing the small folk, maybe he's trying to get back in their favour by doing this, it's also very possible that he's just doing this because these are Aegon's friends, the ones he referred to as lickspittles, and he's been making it very clear since they were appointed that he wants to get rid of them. He's had enough of them. This is the perfect opportunity for him to send them as far away as humanly possible, and the wall is about as far away as he can send them. So he sends them there. They have their white cloaks ripped off them, and they are sent on their merry way. But Larys and Ironrod, while all this is happening, are having a conversation about how Ironrod has acquired this knowledge, through this long and elaborate network of, someone's squire heard it from their father who heard it from a fisher, this whole network of spies who found the information that Seasmoke has a new rider. And so he offers it up to Larys, suggesting maybe you can go and tell the Prince Regent Aemond yourself and gain favour with him. So it's obviously very clear in the small council that Aemond does not like Larys. He made that very clear in the last episode, and it's unclear whether Ironrod is doing this to actually try and benefit Larys or to try and get him in favour with him, or whether this is more of him trying to provoke him to giving him some information that he knows may or may not be from a reliable source. It might be a case that he doesn't want to be left in the small council basically on his own with Aemond, because Maester Orwyle is essentially he's like an envoy from the Citadel. Do you know what I mean? Like, he is relatively impartial, and so he's not necessarily on the side of the rest of the Green Council, and so Ironrod would really be left with Aemond on his own if it's not for Larys. So he might be trying to secure Larys's place in the small council so that there is not some sort of instance in which he could be removed as well, because obviously we haven't even gotten any mention of Otto in this episode as far as I'm aware. You know what, that might be a case where Larys might not have contacted Otto because he doesn't want him back to be Hand of the King. We don't know, because Larys is the one who Aemond instructed to contact Otto in the last episode when he was kind of pitching himself to be Hand of the King. So Otto, not mentioned in this episode, we don't know where he is. He's still very much offline. I am still sticking to perhaps the Beesburys, who were mentioned in this episode for, causing a bit of chaos and a bit of drama out in the Reach. They perhaps have something to do with him not contacting or corresponding. I really just love the idea that the Beesburys have went and kidnapped Otto, and they're going to hold him for ransom and potentially threaten some sort of retribution for Lord Beesbury. But that might be a bit of a reach. They're a very bit of a reach. Do you get it? So they're a very small house in the Reach, so it might be a bit of a reach to suggest that they would even have the power to do something like that, or the capacity to do something like that. But I do think it would be very, very amusing. But again, we don't have Otto here, so realistically it is just these two who are on the balcony currently discussing this. Ironrod and Larys are still the only two with any particular say on the council. And so, Ironrod might be trying to secure Larys's place, or delivering him some semi-unreliable news, but we know that it's actually correct. But Larys doesn't seem very convinced when he hears the network of individuals that this had to pass through to get to him, which is ironic because it's a very similar pattern of, message passing that we later see in the episode about bringing people over to Dragonstone to try out as dragon seeds. So it's interesting that we get that tie-in. we also find in this the information that Rhaena tried to claim Sea Smoke. So Sea Smoke was the dragon that she tried to claim, her uncle's dragon, and was rejected. And we obviously heard in earlier episodes that she nearly died trying to claim a dragon, so it is likely that this was the dragon that she nearly died trying to claim. Which for Larys may further the point that he thinks this is unreliable, because he obviously knows how closely related Rhaena and Sea Smoke's previous rider were, and she couldn't even claim him, so you know, it might lend a bit of credence to him not really wanting to believe the first claim that he hears that someone has now claimed Sea Smoke. So then we get a scene of Rhaenyra and Syrax and Addam and Sea Smoke flying back to Dragonstone, and Jace is out in the balcony watching them as they come in, again looking very unimpressed. Even though this was originally his idea, he does not seem thrilled any longer. But it shows them arriving, and then we cut into the Black Council. Everybody on the Black Council is there but Rhaenyra. They discuss the fact that Sea Smoke and his new rider have come to the island. They're talking about the fact that the new rider is under the employ of Corlys. Doesn't really say very much. But you can see in his face the cogs are turning. He's trying to figure out who it is, and he obviously knows that two of his illegitimate sons are within his employ, and so he's probably sweating a bit now at this council, thinking, are the skeletons in my closet about to be exposed at this painted table? Then discussing, you know, what are we going to do with this thief? What consequences will there be? And we're informed that Rhaenyra has stated that he must be treated as a guest. We see that she is already kind of elevating the status of those who are dragon riders who are successful in claiming the dragons. And in addition to that, we also find out that she will not be attending the council. Everybody looks increasingly, you know, more aggravated with Rhaenyra's behaviour. Obviously, this is less than favourable. This is a significant change in their military advantage, and they really should be meeting in the Black Council to discuss how they're going to adjust their war planning to facilitate the fact that they now have another dragon and dragon rider, and you know, the advantages that this comes with. But instead, Rhaenyra just dismisses the Black Council. You know, she's kind of got to the stage where she doesn't really respect the engagement with these people, because every time that she speaks to them, they're belittling her and berating her. And so even at the end of the last episode, she was offered the opportunity to call her Black Council together and discuss this matter before she flew out in Syrax to meet with Addam and Sea Smoke, but she obviously didn't. She went off on her own volition. And so we're kind of seeing another instance of this where she's bypassing the authority that comes from consulting with her council, and you know, the dignity of having the inclusion of others, and is going for more of a individualistic approach in her ruling and in her decision making. And so we see that she instead goes to Mysaria first, and if Jace wasn't already unimpressed enough at the fact she flew off at the end of the last episode, we obviously see him run out to the balcony and shouting mother when she's flying off, not consulting him, not consulting the council, and he's also her heir. So to some degree, it would be beneficial if he knew what she was doing and what was going on with her. She could have went out and ended up encountering somebody that did claim Sea Smoke on behalf of the Greens, and she could have like died in the last episode, because we see in the intro clip to this episode that Sea Smoke is a lot larger than Syrax, and so she very easily could have been taken out, and Jace would have been left in Dragonstone having no idea what was going on because she hadn't communicated with him. And we've obviously seen that communication and the breakdown of communication has been a massive theme going through the series, and the issues that are caused because of lack of communication or because of miscommunication. And so the very least that she could do would be to communicate with her heir what it is she's doing, because if anything happens to her, he needs to know, and he needs to be able to, you know, fill the role if it becomes vacant. And again, in the Black Council, he's once again made to stand at the head of the table and have discussions on her behalf, essentially. I mean, Corlys doesn't say much, so again, it's mostly him and Bartimaeus Celtigar just going back and forth across the table and finding out that Rhaenyra is once again dismissing her obligation to consult with her council before making these big decisions. So she ends up going off to Mysaria, and again, Jace could only become less impressed with this whole engagement after finding out that she went and chose Mysaria once again over consulting with him and over communicating with him. Alright, so whenever she goes off to talk to Mysaria then, I mean, again, this just reinforces this whole idea that she is now finding her comfort and safety and strength in Mysaria and her council, and the fact that she can go to her and have her ideas heard and facilitated means more to her than going to her council and having all of her decisions questioned and being berated by her councillors and her son and her hand and anybody else that wants to get on the action. So once again, she goes back to the library and she starts browsing around because she's like, surely he has some Targaryen blood. And what's also important about this scene is the fact that she is now saying that there is hope for Vermithor and Silverwing, because you kind of see at the end of the last episode, after what happened with Stefan Darklyn, she is a bit disillusioned with the whole idea and she becomes very concerned that, you know, that they'll have lost because she can't get riders for these other dragons, and the dragons she does have are not large enough to go against the large and formidable Vhagar. And so, you know, seeing this, it puts her in this position where she starts to believe in her cause again, because she knows that if this happened with Sea Smoke, it can happen again. She's talking about how there must be some sort of noble Valyrian blood in Addam, and obviously we know part of his parentage. She does not, so to her it will seem a bit more of a mystery. But then Mysaria comes around and she's almost laughing at her. She's like, there are misbegotten offspring to the Targaryens everywhere. It's not like you were a modest bunch who were not engaging in amorous activity with small folk, especially in Dragonstone, King's Landing and Driftmark. So there are plenty of people that you could choose from. You just need to get away from this notion of nobility being the claws of dragon maiden. She talks about the notion of, you know, the small folk and their loyalty, because Rhaenyra for some reason thinks that the nobles have more of an obligation to be loyal to her because they're so good at keeping their oaths, obviously, and that she can't trust the small folk in the same way because their commitment will waver more easily because, you know, obviously they have more to lose. So there's more reason for them to go with whoever is going to do the most for them at the time, I suppose, is probably where she's trying to get this reasoning from. And Mysaria is like, your own family, you're in a civil war where your own family, your own brothers want you dead, and you're worrying about nobility of blood and how you can believe in the small folk. She's talking about the fact that Addam is a common shipwright and he has shown more commitment and loyalty to her in 5 minutes of meeting her than her own two blood relation brothers of nobility have shown in their entire lifetime, and now are seeking her death actively. So Mysaria once again breaks through to her and is like, we need to go and target the small folk. Once again, the solution is the small folk. They are the key to victory. And, you know, Rhaenyra starts to become more receptive to this idea. So then we have the Tullys arriving at Harrenhal, and of course they show up with their sigils upon their shields, and we have Silver Trout with blue and mud red. Then we have Harrenhal in the background, and it just looks like the most colossal, menacing, gnarly, grotesque fantasy building. It's like if the Black Gates of Mordor were like completely dilapidated and then people tried to inhabit it and call it a castle. It's a beautiful sight to see. But then we get the shot of Daemon sitting with his head in his hands, and it's announced that the Tullys have arrived. He treats with Oscar Tully, who we see here in this photo, and obviously we've seen earlier on in the season when Daemon encouraged him to kill his grandsire to speed on his inheritance. Looks like he didn't have to do that because Alice did that for him. Upon their meeting, Daemon offers his condolences and congratulations on the passing of his grandsire and the assumption of his new role as Lord Paramount. They start having this back and forth about his loyalty and, you know, the fact that all of the Riverlords hate Daemon because he essentially enabled and endorsed the Blackwoods to go and commit atrocities to get the Brackens to bend their knee, which of course they did. And Daemon of course comes back with, I don't need your love, I need your swords, because it couldn't just be normal about the exchange. It couldn't just act like he wanted to make an alliance. God love him. I mean, he started off so strong with his condolence and congratulations, and he ended like this. But I mean, within the conversation, they also talk, well, Oscar also talks about the fact that the River Lords are very loyal to their oaths, and, you know, his grandsire swore an oath to King Viserys that he would respect his heir, and so Oscar wants to see that through and support Rhaenyra. It's just the obstacle that everyone hates, Daemon. It's becoming an issue with him and his vassal houses. Sir Simon, the lovely man he is, then enters the room and says that the River Lords have arrived. So then we get this scene in front of the Heart Tree in Harrenhal, and all the vassal houses of House Tully in the Riverlands have all joined. So we have all the usual suspects, that being the Blackwoods, the Brackens, House Mallister, House Piper, House Mouton, and House Darry. And so they all join for this discussion on whether or not they are going to bend the knee to the Black Queen, and obviously in turn this means pledging allegiance to Daemon Targaryen, who has been less than favourable whilst in the Riverlands. Whenever they initially arrive, Daemon comes in with Oscar and Simon, and he announces Oscar and celebrates him and his ascension. And then he tries the whole appealing to the old ways, you know, you swear your oaths and you are honour bound, and that your commitment to the old ways essentially obligates you to uphold your oath and bend the knee to the Black Queen. And of course they're like, yes, okay, we're very honour bound and respect our oaths, but you came in and permitted atrocities to be committed against us, and so we will not bend the knee to you until we see justice and retribution for these vile acts. Lord Piper starts pitching this and has a verbal conflict with Willem Blackwood, who is there, and he's trying to justify his actions, saying, we did what we had to do to get the Brackens to bend the knee, and here they are, and so we should be celebrated. We have this great feat, this great success on behalf of the crown that we are meant to support. And the rest of the houses essentially make it very, very clear that they have no love for Daemon, but that they will respect their oath if they see justice. And so Lady Mallister steps forward and she says, the old ways demand justice. And so Oscar Tully essentially agrees that he has no love for Daemon, but he respects his oath, and despite the fact that the emissary Daemon has been less than favourable, he essentially says that he will keep his oath if justice is delivered, but the Daemon must be the one to deliver it. Daemon is obligated to execute Willem Blackwood. This entire time Willem is protesting, and he looks like he is waiting for Daemon to defend him, because obviously we've seen there was some sort of like camaraderie shared between the two in the exchange that they had in the last episode, but it very quickly becomes clear that Daemon is going to have to oblige, and even Simon is like, oh god, you know, this isn't good, because the Blackwoods army is larger than the Tullys, but it's just the fact that the combined forces of all these vassal houses are needed in the war that Daemon essentially has to do this. He doesn't really have an option. And he seems reluctant himself, because he obviously knows that the Blackwoods are very efficient fighters and that they can be very ruthless, and that's what he wants personally. I think he also probably sees a lot of himself in Willem Blackwood, in the fact that he is, you know, violent and unpredictable, and he doesn't shy away from conflict or the opportunity to get a bit vile with the acts that he carries out in the name of what he considers his cause. And, you know, I mean, we've seen this with Daemon multiple times. We've seen how low he was able to stoop in literally the first episode of the entire series, when he and the Gold Cloaks go out and just start committing atrocities in the streets of King's Landing to quell any sort of upset or unrest from the small folk during the tourney, and to essentially discipline them. And I think he sees a lot of that in Willem Blackwood as well. And the fact that he is also someone who is in a position where he's ruling, but ruling on behalf of someone else, that he doesn't actually have the power himself, but the power has kind of gone to his head. And he, you know, Willem Blackwood even sees it, that he has been loyal, that he's done what he was asked, but it's the manner of how he did it that ended up getting him in this hot water, this complicated situation where others are now having to clean up after his mess, like young Rhaenyra said to Daemon. So I think he also is having that internal issue where he kind of feels like this young man reminds me a lot of myself, especially in my youth and in my arrogance. And so him executing Willem almost seems as though, even though it's difficult for him, it is kind of signifying this transition for Daemon from this place where he was young and reckless and impulsive and violent to a fault, that he now has to be more considerate in his political engagements and in the relationships that he's forging. And so he now needs to execute those undesirable traits in himself that have made his life so difficult, in the same way that Willem Blackwood has in this scene here. Very interesting that we're appealing to the old gods so much in this scene. Obviously Daemon sees it as advantageous because these houses are very much referring to them and revering of them, and so he sees the use of religion and religious symbolism in the way he's speaking to these people and the sentiments that he's appealing to within them. He sees that as beneficial for him, and so he's utilizing that as a tool in his arsenal to try and bring these people onto his side. But later on we see, and I mean throughout the last couple of episodes, we've seen that Rhaenyra is also appealing to religious elements, but we don't really know what religious elements she's pulling on. So that's something that we'll discuss a bit further on. But it's interesting to note this appeal to the old gods here, and then her later appeal to people's tendency to cleave to religion, especially in times of uncertainty like these. So then, after this scene out in the Godswood, Daemon comes inside, presumably after making his deals with Oscar Tully and with other river lords. He comes in and passes this black goat once again, who seems to be some sort of precursor for him falling into a vision dream state. And it's unclear whether there's supposed to be some sort of connection between Alice Rivers and potentially Wargan the goat. It remains present as a sign of, again, the magic of the old gods and their influence on him while he's in Harrenhal. And so he passes this goat and goes into his sleeping chambers, where he finds King Viserys. And he's sitting on the edge of the bed, and he is in his final state of being entirely decrepit and decaying. And it turns out, in the behind the scenes, they were talking about the fact that this was Paddy Considine's idea, the actor that plays Viserys, that he wanted to be sitting on the edge of the bed holding the crown, but he wanted it to essentially depict, how destructive that power and ruling and the crown was, that it, eats away at a person like it had him, and he didn't want it, and still it destroyed him. And so that's very much illustrated in this scene, and that is very much communicated within the dialogue as well. He's talking about the fact that he didn't want the crown and that he was right not to, that the destructive nature of power absolutely runs ruin on a person. And so even he who didn't want it, who didn't lust for power, was still corrupted and, had this corruption of his skin here. It was like when the throne had cut him, and the cut just festered and festered in the way that power bestowed upon someone by the throne, by the crown, festers within them and eventually corrupts them and destroys them. And so he's warning Daemon. It's like he's delivering these didactic messages and this moral allegory to him, and that he had to suffer through having this crown. It's like what Alice said to him in the last episode. It's not a prize to have the crown. It's a burden to bear. And it's very much communicated by Viserys, both visually and in dialogue in this scene. And then he asks Daemon, you've always wanted this crown, do you still want it? It's hard to look at Viserys in this state, looking at him and him with the crown off, holding it in his hand, telling him, of the destructive nature of all the things that it did for him, the destruction that befell upon his house over the sake of it. It's hard to look at him and think that anybody could want this. And you very much see that in Daemon. There's absolutely no desire in his eyes to have this crown. There is no ambition to try and take it. It's very, very clear here that we are being shown this transition from the Daemon that we've been seeing for the rest of the season, who was becoming absolutely consumed with the need for power and the need to rule and his ambition for the crown and for the throne. And now we're seeing that he has had the realization that none of this is actually what he wants. And we obviously seen that in the 2 visions with Viserys in the last episode, that it was kind of stepstones to this point. But now that we see him in this final stage, he is well and truly departed from those initial feelings that he had when he got to Harrenhal and had developed through staying there. Now we can only hope that we're going to get a bit more of a commitment to a war effort for Rhaenyra, which even then is still very much accepting the corruption of your wife. Then we get this scene with King Aegon trying to walk with Grand Maester Orwell, and he has a cane and Orwell's the other side of him trying to help him walk. He's just retching, he's doubled over in pain, he's just crying and saying that he can't do it. And then the cane breaks and he falls, and Orwell's trying to like catch him and help him up. And you know, it's so hard to look at Aegon, you know, and see that fall from grace. But to see this scene immediately following the scene with Daemon and Viserys really does depict like a side by side almost of the father and the son, and how, you know, how corruptive that this power is, and the fact that once you get the crown in your head, it does this to you, and it's unavoidable almost. And you know, we see this almost side by side comparison of Viserys with holes in his face, and he can barely even hold his head up, and he's wheezing and wincing in pain. And then we cut straight to the scene of Aegon, who is sitting with half his face burned off him on the opposite side to his father, and you know, he can't even walk, he's shuffling, he's wincing, he eventually falls and needs to be carried back to bed. And again, this pain and agony in his voice, this sharpness to his breathing, we just see these really, really visceral physical consequences of this nobility, of the regality of being king. And the consequence for Viserys was that essentially he tried to stay on the throne as long as he could, and the throne killed him. And that, you know, Aegon was trying to show himself as a legitimate king figure, and so flew out to battle on his dragon wearing the Conqueror's armour, and he was melted and had to be carried back to King's Landing in a box, and now is laid up absolutely a broken man, and he's having to learn how to walk again, and having to learn how to, you know, exist in the state that he has now found himself, following his pursuit of being perceived as a legitimate king. And so, you know, seeing those visual parallels beside each other, it's so impactful. And then we see Larys come in, and obviously Larys and Aegon had this really deep and meaningful conversation in the last episode, where Larys spoke about, you know, his experience with disability in this world, in Westeros, in his position, and he's talking to Aegon, being the only person that's really understanding him at this time, but no one else is really paying any heed to Aegon at this point. But Larys has this commonality with him now, and they have this shared experience, and he is trying to bond with the king, knowing that Aemond has no love for him, and so he has no power that way, but that the only avenue to power that he has now is through his relationship with Aegon that he has already been forging, and so can only strengthen now that they have this shared experience. It's very clear in this that he is trying to rush Aegon's recovery, and I mean, Aegon's been recovering very quickly anyway over the last couple of episodes, because in the book it says he's like bound for the next year, but obviously 3 episodes have passed, and all of the open wounds have essentially healed over, and he is now up on his supposedly snapped leg, trying to walk again. Obviously he's struggling a lot and still suffering a lot. Orwell, you know, whenever Larys comes in, he helps him back over to the bed and says to Orwell, you know, oh, maybe you shouldn't be doing this on your own with the king. He's like, I pushed him on your instruction. And, you know, so it's made very clear to us, the audience, that Larys is the one who's saying to Orwell, right, as much as Aemon's saying that you have to keep him in bed, I'm telling you, you have to get him out, and we have to get him back on his feet, because you've seen what Aemon's like in the council, and we need to get Aegon back on the throne, because at least we can manipulate him. So, you know, obviously he's trying to get him back up and on his feet so that they can get the Prince Regent out of there with a swiftness. Then he turns around and he says, you know, try him again in a few hours. So then we get this very interesting scene with Corlys and his son Alyn of Hull, who is now his first mate on his ships. And initially, you know, they're speaking beside the ship, they're talking about they need to sail to the waters by King's Landing for assistance, and then he, you know, assistance with the blockade. And then he pulls them aside and tells them of Addam successfully claiming sea smoke. And his brother is somewhat surprised, but of course he recognizes that his brother has always had ambition, and so, you know. And then Corlys is talking about the fact that the Velaryon household are of Old Valyria, but that they are not dragon riders, and so he's kind of expressing what we were talking about in that that video that I did a couple of weeks ago, talking about, you know, I think it was called like sea snakes, seafarers, and sea smoke or something. But essentially, like, how is Addam supposed to claim sea smoke if they are confirmed to be Corlys's? Because then there'd be no Targaryen blood involved, and that's essentially what this whole episode's about, is about blood purity and nobility and whatever. But Corlys is having this conversation with Alyn. I didn't know much about your mother, but potentially there is something there in terms of Targaryen or dragon rider blood. So then he makes the suggestion that maybe Alyn would want to try and get a dragon as well, you know, while they're sowing the dragon seeds. But Alyn turns around and says that I am of salt and sea, I yearn for nothing else. And so this very, very blatantly harkens back to the conversation with Corlys and Vale in an earlier episode, where he offers her driftmark and she rejects it, saying that she is of blood and fire and it must pass to salt and sea. So, setting up for something. Also, then we get a very quick scene after this of Rhaena in the Vale, and of Jane Arryn seeing Rhaena and Aegon the Younger and Viserys off to the Gay Abandon to go off to Essos. And we see Rhaena break away from the group and run off into the hills of the Vale and go to a sheep burn pile, and she's clearly looking for this large and formidable wild dragon that is in the Vale. So we are going to see what happens with that in the next episode. Then we get this clip of Alicent, and she is now in the Kingswood with Sir Rickard Thorne, and he has set up, you know, a small encampment for them, and it just shows that she's walking through the wooded area. They arrive on horseback, and she goes and says she's going to turn in for the night, and he's asking, you know, how long are we going to be here? You know, she's very much suggesting that she might not go back. And I think this is meant to be the reference to where she's, you know, almost suicidal, and this is her way of communicating it, is I might not end up back in King's Landing, or at least not back here alive. We kind of see that she is really experiencing a lot of turmoil here, and she has no direction and doesn't know what to do with herself. And then we have this conversation. We're back in Dragonstone, and we have a conversation between Rhaenyra and Jace that is honestly very, very long overdue. So he comes in and essentially is like, was it her idea, now that you're looking to, you know, get just about anybody with the drop of Targaryen blood in them, that you're looking to get them out here now and start getting dragon riders claimed? Because he's obviously feeling a lot of insecurity about the fact that he recognises that he is illegitimate, and so he feels that his legitimacy is going to be called into question if it's seen that other illegitimate Targaryens are claiming dragons, because he has obviously seen that, you know, his claim to legitimacy, and the fact that Rhaenyra made sure that all of her sons to Harwin, the fact that she made sure that they all had their dragon's egg in the cradle with them, that they bonded when they were born, that they all learned High Valyrian, and that they all became dragon riders. She ensured all this because she wanted to, you know, use this as a symbol of their legitimacy, and the fact that, you know, these are my true Targaryen heirs, and you can see this because they themselves are dragon riders. You know, just look past the brunette, look past it, look past the brown eyes, it's fine. So, you know, he's now looking at this like, you use this as my sign of legitimacy, and this was the one thing that I had that I could use to really press my claim. You know, like if something happens to you, this is what I was using to press my claim, is the fact I am a legitimate Targaryen, I am a dragon rider, I am the heir to the Iron Throne, and now you're gonna let it be known that illegitimate Targaryens can claim dragons too. He says to Rhaenyra accusingly that it, you know, was this Mysaria's idea. He is well and truly fed up with these two. I don't think he's on board with the whole here's your second mom thing. So God love him, he's not coping well. And he calls them mongrels, which, I mean, this is so telling of his own insecurity and how loathsome he is of his own lineage. He has to live with the fact that Harwin is his follower and that he is part strong, but that he is not legitimate, and he is, as much as he's the true heir to the Iron Throne, you know, it raises all these questions, because obviously there's questions now about legitimization of Corlys' sons. It raises questions why she couldn't just legitimize her own sons, or she couldn't have had her follower legitimize her own sons. Do you know what I mean? Like, it would have made all this so much easier, but instead now she is having these conversations with her son, where her son is expressing, you know, his complete insecurity, you know, internally and psychologically and personally, but also the insecurity of his position in terms of the fact that if these other dragon seeds come over and they're successful in claiming these dragons, they are claiming dragons. And we even see here, you know, she's talking about the fact that this is a necessity and that she can't go up against Vhagar, and that he definitely can't go up against Vhagar with his small dragon, but the both of them now need to come to terms with the fact that they are given the, like, second and third largest dragons essentially in the realm to complete strangers, to common folk that are illegitimate Targaryens at some stage in their history, and now they're putting themselves at a disadvantage because they're giving away these really large formidable dragons. And so Jace is like, so what if these base-born silver-haired dragon riders intend to push their claim for the throne? You know, people will see them as more legitimate than I because they have this Targaryen silver hair and they have the larger dragons, and it's all, my parentage has already been questioned for the entirety of my existence. So, you know, it really brings up this conflict between these two. It essentially comes to a head where he finally turns around and says, did you think I would come out with brown hair when you bedded Harwin strong? And oh my god, as much as I want to be like, the disrespect this man has towards his mother, like, it is understandable in this circumstance because it is very questionable, you know, what his future is going to be if these are the circumstances of dragon claiming. As much as it was his idea to go around the noble houses and see if they had any Targaryen blood, that would have still secured his claim, whereas this very much brings it into question, and he just can't cope with it at all. And it's the first time we really see him like beg his mother for something, and he is begging her not to do this, and she is essentially like, I must, the gods will it. And it's going to be tough for poor Jace in the future episodes. So then we get a clip, and this is essentially Mysaria passing a note on to Alyn to take to King's Landing, and that this should be passed to Alinda. And it's essentially for the sowing of the dragon seeds, the red sowing, title of the episode. And so Alinda spreads the word and is aided somewhat by the gold cloaks. I think it is actually specifically the gold cloak that helped her in the last episode, helps her in this one too. We kind of get all these clips of how the messages are passed, and we even get the clip of where it's passed from the fisherman with the basket of fish, and how it's passed in from there, you know, kind of directly speaking to the lines we got earlier in the episode between Larys and Ironrod, you know, how these networks of whispers within King's Landing are seemingly working for both sides. But, you know, in this instance we see that it's very effective in recruiting the dragon seeds. So then we see Ulf in the bar with all of his little drinking buddies that we've seen earlier on, and his friends come in and they're like, have you heard Rhaenyra's recruiting dragon riders? All you have to do is, you know, go down to the bay, and the boats are going to be taking people over to Dragonstone to try out. And, you know, they say you can stick a Daemon, you can get a dragon, like, you know, this would be great. Sure, you're a Targaryen? You've been telling all of this for the longest time. All of a sudden, Ulf gets very insecure about his parentage, and he's like, oh, well, you know, I'm not 100% sure. And he starts making all these excuses. Oh, you know, my leg hasn't been the same since the accident. And they're like, you've been drinking for free for years from everybody in the town buying you drinks because you're claiming to be a Targaryen, which is absolutely wild. I don't understand why they're like paying this man's bar tab because he's claiming to be a Targaryen. Like, clearly, given this episode, there are plenty of illegitimate Targaryens in the water out there, but alas, he is eventually convinced because his friends all get up at the table and start chanting Ulf the Dragon Lord, and then he's kind of peer pressured into going and trying his hand at getting a dragon. I couldn't see this going any other way, to be honest. Then on the other hand, we have Hugh in the scene immediately following this, where he is speaking to his partner Kat, and we find out they have lost their daughter, who's very unwell throughout the season, and we find out that he is of Targaryen descent, and he was aware of that, and he apologizes to her for not having told her. And where Ulf's friends were actively encouraging him to go, Hugh's wife is trying to deter him from going and trying to still push this notion, we can go to my brother in Tumbleton, and I really don't want you to do this, and she doesn't want them to die by dragonfire, given that the fact they just lost their daughter. And he's like, I need to go, I need to take this opportunity. And so the speculation is, and is very likely, that he is Sarah Targaryen's son, so her illegitimate son, and she was essentially cast out from the Targaryen household. She was Jaehaerys's daughter, and Jaehaerys had very strained relationships with his daughters, very much so compared to his sons, but especially with Sarah Targaryen, because she was quite promiscuous, and he felt that this was bringing shame upon the household, and he essentially cast her out to essentially join a convent, like to be a septa, and she was like, absolutely no chance, I'm not living that life, it's not for me, not one of abstinence. And so she runs off and joins a pleasure house and becomes a sex worker. And so we learn from Hugh that his mother was a Targaryen sex worker, that that they paid more for a woman with white hair, which is interesting because obviously we've seen a woman with white hair at the earlier season, so hopefully she was getting her coin. But we see that he even says himself that he had some sort of shame about her occupation and stuff, and so he didn't really claim his lineage because of all this, and because of the nature of her being put out of the family, and all these notions of patriarchy and the anti-sex worker sentiment. And if these men would just evolve, maybe things would go a bit better for them, but sure. He ends up anyway, he goes and gets loaded up on the boats to go over to Dragonstone. Just to cut in here, this is one of the scenes of them heading down to the boats to go over to Dragonstone, and I think it's notable that Alyn is there and he's kind of shipping everybody onto these boats and off again. He's very much embedded in Mysaria's plotting and scheming, so they must know each other to some degree, but I digress. In this shot here, we have all these white-haired individuals at the front that are walking down to the beach, and then we have this woman at the back, and there was multiple photos during the filming process of this character standing with Ulf and Hugh and a couple other individuals, and people were speculating this was going to be Nettles. Now this is kind of like spoilery, but also not really, because it looks like this character is being merged, so don't even worry about this. But essentially all I'm going to say is I went and watched it back and had a look in the scene that we eventually get to with Vermithor, where he is smoking everybody, and this character is not there from what I can see, and I watched it back, and frame by frame I could not see this character anywhere. So, and also in the scene where Rhaenyra was talking to everyone, I do not think that they were there either. So I'm not saying hold out hope for Nettles, because I think we need to accept that that is probably not going to be happening, but this character did not seem to go up in flames with everyone else. So if they do try and fake out in the next episode and be like, oh, Rhaena thought she was going to get this dragon, oh well, somebody else beat you to it, I don't know. But yeah, something to think about. So then we get this scene of Alicent, and she's in the lake in the Godswood, and it's very interesting to kind of see how her character progression has occurred. Initially she was so skeptical and so critical of Rhaenyra for sleeping with Kristen Cole, and she was acting all concerned whenever she ran off during Aegon's second name day, and now she has also had her entanglings with Kristen Cole, and she finds herself in the lake in the same Kingswood that Rhaenyra ran off in. But it's obvious that she is now taking this whole thing where she lies in the bath to try and reconcile with herself and to try and rid herself of guilt by doing the whole Lady Macbeth, scrubbing the same spot with a sponge vigorously over and over to try and wash away the sins that she's committed, and try and find some sort of salvation for herself and trying to scrub herself clean of her misdeeds. But here, we see that she's officially got to the point where she is out of political power. She can't use politics as a distraction anymore for her role that she's played in this whole civil war and in the usurping of the throne and in the indignities that her sons are committing upon her house, atrocities that they're going to be committing given the power that they've been able to acquire through her deeds. And so she, there's no bath big enough for her to go and feel that she's washed off the sins of her misunderstandings and misdoings. And so she goes to this lake. And, we already spoke in the trailer video about how she was walking down in this blue floral cloak, and that the blue flowers are prominent on the House Florent sigil, and how, this might symbolise her divorcing herself from the Hightower aspects of herself for the time being, trying to reconcile with, her maternal and domestic, the way Aemon put it, sensibilities in that of her mother. I mean, we don't know much about her mother, but it is notable that this blue floral comes up when she is feeling very disconnected from her household, from her sons. Her father's gone, her brother's gone, and it seems that she's trying to find salvation elsewhere, and she can't even find it in the Sept any longer, because the last time she went, then Rhaenyra showed up, Sept or Rhaenyra, and then she tries to go to light candles with her daughter for her son, and she is swarmed in food riots and gets caught, and it's just no longer a place of peace for her, and so she has to flee the capital with her Kingsguard to go to the Godswood and to go and lie in this lake to try and find some sort of salvation, some sort of peace. And even the imagery of her in the blue cloak with this white underdress is very like Virgin Mother Mary, again appealing to this religious imagery. And then once she gets in the water, in the upper photo there, you can see she adopts this like Jesus Christ pose almost, but at the same time she's looking up at this bird, and she starts kind of, the way she's moving her arms in the water to swim and keep herself afloat, it's almost like she's replicating the flight motion of the bird. She's like appealing for freedom, and she's kind of mimicking the bird in that she recognizes that the bird has ultimate freedom and she does not. She's in the confines of her cage that she was trying to make a window in, as Rhaenys was saying at the end of season 1, that she didn't desire freedom, she didn't desire power, she desired to make a window in the walls of her cage. And this is her finally breaking free from that. I hope and pray. I really hope that this acts as some sort of awakening for her to now stand up against her Prince Regent's son and his disrespect of her, because it seems like she might do a bit of that in the next episode based on the trailer, which we will look at maybe tomorrow. So very interesting shot, very interesting scene, absolutely beautifully shot. The cinematography in this was amazing, and it was so starkly different than the other scenes that are swiftly to follow this, that are very much engulfed in flame and full of chaos. This was just watery scene, very peaceful. So now we go back to Dragonstone, and we have all of the candidates for the dragon seeds showing up and entering the castle walls, and Rhaenyra goes down to meet with them and to speak to them before taking them down to Vermithor, and she is stopped at the bottom of the stairs by the Dragonkeepers, and the Dragonkeepers are entirely dissatisfied with the goings on that are afoot. The Dragonkeepers are rebuking the dragon seeds. They're saying that this is a blasphemy. They state, "You've already sent an andal before the dragons and judgment was delivered, and now you intend to send more." And they're really stating the fact that these dragons are these mythical creatures that are beyond our comprehension and beyond our instruction, and that Rhaenyra is essentially being disrespectful and even blasphemous to suggest that just anyone could ride them, and to even put the dragons in a situation where they have to experience this tryout scenario that's being set up is a disrespect in itself, because they're not respecting the sanctity of these godlike figures that the Dragonkeepers and their order have devoted their lives to. He states in this whole scene that they're communicating with each other and isn't High Valyrian. The Dragonkeepers do know the common tongue, but eventually they get to the point where they only speak in High Valyrian, and it very much seems that these Dragonkeepers are at that stage that they've obviously dedicated themselves and committed a lot of their life to this. And because he's talking about the Andals, it introduces this conversation of, where do the Dragonkeepers come from? Did they come from Old Valyria, and has their bloodline been kept pure to some degree as well to pursue this job? Is it an inherited role, or is it vocation? But in this case, would they be Andals or First Men, and this is why they have such reverence? It's unclear, but it's very interesting, something that I'd love to dive into more. All the information that we have about the Dragonkeepers. But he states that the dragons are not playthings for men in their wars, and so, you know, they're very much trying to drive home the fact that these creatures are individuals, and so are unpredictable and cannot be depended upon as essentially some sort of machinery, that they are living sentient beings, and this must be considered when deciding to initiate a war with them. And still Rhaenyra is trying to just pass it away, like, oh, you know, it's fine, we're going to push forward. And the Dragonkeepers say that our order will have no part in this, and they leave. And so Rhaenyra is now left with other Dragonkeepers, and so it's going to be very interesting to see how she goes about the training of the new dragon riders, because, you know, obviously we've seen that her sons were educated by the Dragonkeepers in the Dragon Pit in season 1, and so it's going to be very interesting to see, you know, who's going to maintain the Dragon's living quarters, who's going to teach the new riders. You know, there's a lot of really essential roles that these figures have within the operations of this island that is so heavily based on its dragon culture and the necessity of these dragons within the war machine. So it's going to be interesting to see, you know, who's feeding them, who's caring for them, who's cleaning up after them, who's training the riders. Because I can't see the royal household being capable of doing that, but they might just pass over that. We'll see. But yeah, this conflict occurs, and then Rhaenyra starts to talk to the dragon seeds that she has there, and again is evoking this really religious biblical imagery. And we hear from the inside the episode from Ryan Condal that it's supposed to be like this almost cult-like dissemination of, you know, instruction to these individuals. You know, it's not so much in the ways that she was talking to Stefan in the last episode, where she was saying, you know, I am not ordering you to do this because you could end up losing your life. This is entirely up to you. She is speaking to these individuals as though it is assumed already that they are going to go and do this because they've shown up. Interestingly enough, she states, you know, essentially their state is going to be changed after this, you know, if they're successful or not. And she says some of you may even desire change or even death, given the alternatives, and lists starvation as one of them, even though she is the one actively enforcing the blockade that was leading to the starvation in King's Landing. She is trying to exploit that even now to try and drum up support. So it's kind of like, I've left you in the dark place and now I offer you the redemption, and so you have to follow me. And again, all this religious imagery is harkening back to her continuous references to the gods. Even now, she was saying that the suffering will be ended without bloodshed, God willing. For her to be referring to God's willing, what gods are you referring to? Like, we've been saying this in almost every episode, she keeps referring back to these, you know, religious icons, but it's unclear what faith that she's actually referring to, if it's the old gods or the new, or if it's herself as a dragon rider and the dragons as gods themselves. We don't actually know, and it seems like she is becoming sort of like a disillusioned pretender messiah to try and prompt up her side by appealing to the small folks' need for faith and religion in times of destitution. We also heard in the behind the episode that this was Emma Darcy's idea for them to walk into the crowd almost like a pastor preaching a sermon, and so it really feels like they're almost setting up for like this ritualistic sacrifice that's going to be happening now when they go to meet Vermithor. Like they're utilising some sort of blood magic, you know, in this same token as the original dragon bonds were formed that we obviously see in the intro sequence, and in the same way that, you know, a sacrifice must pay for the magic, it's almost as though this ritualistic sacrifice is being set up in this scene here and in these references to religious imagery. And it's also ironic that the Dragonkeepers have just accused her of being blasphemous and therefore frame her as a like heretical messiah figure, and that she is essentially going mad with power to send these people off to sacrifice in pursuit of her own cause, in pursuit of her securing further power. And you know, it again reinforces this cult-like imagery. So then they all walk down to the dragon pit and we get this shot here, and I think it's notable that Jace is not here. He's obviously still very annoyed about all this, and now she has Vale and Addam at her right and left side, as well as her one remaining Queen's Guard. And then we have all the dragon seeds following behind. And so she goes in, she calls Vermithor, she says, "Come forward, Vermithor," and he does, which obviously, you know, indicates that they actually do have the capacity to call individual dragons forward. So it's interesting to note. She tells him to calm and goes, and we have that shot of her touching his nose, which is again just to show the absolute colossal scale of Vermithor because he's huge. And then she turns around and we get this shot that is like side by side reflection of the shot that they used for the box set for season 1, of young Rhaenyra standing in front of the dragon. Now we have the shot of older Rhaenyra standing in front of Vermithor in, you know, the same sort of red robes, which are also kind of harkening to like religious dress almost. She then turns around to them, and instead of trying to reassure them at all, she says, "I can do no more. It is the dragon who'll choose," and she goes up to watch from the balcony. And something that I found really notable in this scene too, that I didn't realise until the watch back, was that, you know, the first person walks forward and attempts to claim Vermithor and gets burned alive, along with I think 5 or 6 other people in the first bout of burning. And the people start running, all the Dragonseed individuals who came to try out all start running to try and flee. And I didn't really realise in the first watch round of this, but in the rewatch I seen that there were all these men who were in armour who were preventing them from getting out the door, like forcing them to stay on this platform. You know, the doors had been closed behind them. I don't know, very, very interesting. It really, if you look at that and consider this whole idea of that these individuals prefer a ritualistic sacrifice to basically get the gods in their favour and so that they could promote the bonding of these two dragons, it starts to look like a very, very sinister picture is being painted of Rhaenyra, and the fact she was so utterly devastated over, you know, the death of Stefan in the last episode, and now she is just sacrificing scores of people to the dragons with little concern. It's quite concerning. Let's see, this is what I mean. Just turns into utter chaos very, very quickly. Vermithor, obviously known as the Bronze Fury, really lived up to his name, set scores of people on fire, and, you know, then proceeded to eat people to knock everyone off of this. Everyone was running around in the depths of the dragon mont, trying to escape, trying to find a way out, and he was just going and just recklessly burning everyone, indiscriminately eating individuals that were trying to flee from him. And then we get all these scenes intercut with, you know, Hugh and Ulf to kind of track where they are, and Ulf, he falls off the platform almost immediately and just starts scurrying to try and get out of the dragon mont, and we catch up with him afterwards. But then it kind of focuses on Hugh, and it does this really long continuous shot of him trying to escape, but also just in the depths of all of this turmoil and carnage that's going on, and all these individuals who are running past him and they're burned, and, you know, he sees these individuals getting eaten by the dragon, and then there's this girl that he decides he's going to try and save, and, you know, gives him this kind of hero arc. You know, this girl is potentially reminding him of his daughter, and he remarks earlier on in the episode that he wasn't able to save her, you know, his own daughter, and so he attempts to save this woman. She goes to run out to flee, and Vermithor, you know, essentially corners her, and Hugh steps out from behind the rock that they were both hiding behind and shouts, "I'm here, I'm ready." So he goes to confront the dragon. He goes up against Vermithor and shouts, "I'm ready," and screams into this dragon's face. and this dragon has just gone round and burned everybody in front of him and eaten others, and has set fire to half the inside of the dragon mont. And something about this courage that he has to stand up to Vermithor really seems to appeal to him, and this defiance and confidence and bravery that he exhibits ends up putting him in Vermithor's favour. And Vermithor comes down, bows his head, and Hugh realises that the dragon is submitting to him, and so he eventually gets a smile on his face, despite the fact he just seen this creature absolutely decimate dozens of individuals that he came over here with and his fellow townsfolk. But he smiles, he realises that he has chosen him, and Rhaenyra looks down approvingly at this whole encounter. Ulf, on the other hand, had a less than dignified encounter with the beauty that is Silverwing. And so he goes further and further into the bowels of the dragon mont, trying to escape, and it's notable that both of them step in some sort of liquid on the ground. Hugh steps in, like one of those clutches of eggs that Daemon found in season 1. He steps in one of those. It doesn't look like he breaks the egg, but also there's a clutch of eggs down here. Are we supposed to acknowledge this? Is this going to pay off at all? Are we finally going to get the, I don't know. Are we going to acknowledge these? Perhaps, perhaps not. I want some theories of where these dragon eggs could have ended up, because the possibilities are endless. And if I don't see some theories, I might mix them. So God love you all if I start making theories. So we see that Hugh fell in some sort of puddle, that could be dragon urine, perhaps, hard to say. Dragon lighter fuel for all his dragon carnage, dragon fire that's around him, possibly. But then we see that Ulf steps in the dragon clutch in the sack of liquid, and so they both end up with obviously some dragon smell on them, I would assume. And this is just for their claim, so I don't know if maybe that has some sort of connection. It's the fact that they also both claim to be, directly connected to Targaryens within one generation. And so, and the fact that Hugh is claiming to be Jaehaerys' and Alicent's daughter's son, and Ulf is claiming to be their son's son. And so these are obviously, Vermithor was previously ridden by King Jaehaerys, and Silverwing, this beauty right here, was previously ridden by Queen Alicent. And so the fact that they're being claimed by their supposed grandchildren, we see Hugh stumbling into this dragon's lair, and she is such a lovely placid girl. She gets up and just starts playfully nudging him, and he realizes, oh, okay, she's not going to kill me, maybe I can bond with her. And it's a very sweet scene. Supposedly she is wearing the saddle in this, because I know there's a bit of debate already how she was wearing a saddle in the later on in the episode. Supposedly she's wearing a saddle in the scene. I watched it back and it does kind of look like it. I think as well these saddles are bolted onto them, because it looked like that in the shot of Rhaenys and Melly's at Rook's Rest. But I digress. So then we end up in the Green Council, and Prince Regent Aemon is sitting speaking with Larys and Ironrod and Orwell. They're sitting having discussions about the fact that Targaryen has now taken to wing, and so Prince Daemon Targaryen is going to be joining the battle soon, coming with the Hightower forces, and that's going to be very interesting. Did you see Targaryen in that trailer? Can't wait to go through the trailer with these. I'm probably going to leave it till tomorrow, it's getting late today, but Targaryen is beautiful, beautiful blue queen. Anyways, so we hear that, and then all of a sudden we hear dragon being shouted, and the bells being rung. And initially because it kind of zooms in on Aemon while this is happening, and that he's kind of like disoriented and looking around like very aggravated, like what's going on. And I initially thought this was going to be some sort of like a dream sequence delusion, that he was going to be having some sort of flashbacks to Rook's Rest of them shouting dragon. I did not think for the life of me that he was going to look out and see Silverwing and Ulf flying above the streets of King's Landing. First of all, She is so beautiful. I love her. I love her so much. I'm such a big fan. Every time there's a female dragon on the show that's not Vhagar, I'm like, I'm such a big fan. Love her. Anyway, so I think favourite dragons go Moondancer. If you want to get back into focus. Okay, I think favourite dragon so far, Moondancer, Silverwing, and then probably Jace's dragon. I don't know. No, Stormcloud. Stormcloud. It's okay. Moondancer, Silverwing, Stormcloud. Love them. Anyway, so joyriding on Silverwing over the top of King's Landing, and we see them readying the scorpions and everything. Like, this man has no idea what he's getting himself into and is so ill-equipped to be a dragon rider. It's not even funny. But clearly Silverwing was sitting in the dragon mont for God knows how long, probably decades at this point, and the first person she sees, she's like, yeah, sure, I'll take him. Let's go for a run. She was just in cabin fever. She just wanted out for a ride. So then we have there was a lot of debate too about the fact that people thought she would have been a lot bigger than she is, and now I think this is probably in relation to how they were talking about, you know, when the dragons are kept in like Dragon Pit, Dragonmont, they tend to be smaller than those who are wild ranging dragons, and it seems that she has been in the Dragonmont for, you know, decades, like I say at this point, and so I think it kind of makes sense that she's slightly smaller than people would have thought, but she's a beautiful girl anyway, and we will fight for her. We will fight for her. And so Aemond is like, who is this dragon? Who is this dragon rider? And obviously Ironrod and Laris made the decision earlier on in the episode not to go with him, or not to go to him with this information that Seasmoke had a new rider. And so they probably thought it might have been Seasmoke. Now they're looking, it's another dragon with another rider. And so the Green Council is going to be shook up after seeing this. We seen Aemond run to that horse, and so we get him running to the horse, and the way he jumped on this horse was the smoothest thing I've literally ever seen. Like, the way he jumped up on top of this horse and threw himself over its back was so smooth. It was so incredibly smooth. The poor horse, but like, wow, like I thought it was CGI. It was that crisp of a transition. Anyway, he jumps up on this horse and starts riding out, and we were talking in the comments section of my last video looking at the trailer for this episode, because I was like, what under God is he doing? And then I was having a conversation with someone. Let me just get the name. So Blinkus Fishes 2052, who is a regular watcher and commenter, hi, hello, lovely to speak to you, was commenting saying, knowing Aemond, he's run into the number one woman in his life, Vhagar. To which I replied, this very well could be the case. We don't know where Vhagar resides when he's in the Red Keep, so we might have to ride to get out there. We sussed them out. Me and you. Anyway, so that's exactly what happens. He rides out to Vhagar, who is outside, hiding in the greenery as usual, being a lovely big Jurassic terror to the town. And so he rides out, hops on Vhagar, and starts flying over, chasing Hugh and Silverwing over to Dragonstone. And then he gets there, and he is greeted by this beautiful sight of Rhaenyra with these 3 dragons in chorus. And, you know, we have Syrax, we have Bronze Fury behind her. A lot of people were questioning why Vermithor was this reddish colour. Bronze is like a red metal, so makes sense. A lot of people were questioning, like, oh, it looks like Melis. Babe, I'm the first person that doesn't want to say this, but Melis has unfortunately passed away. This is the colour of bronze. It's like given 2p. Do you know what I mean? So we have these 3 dragons. He was obviously not expecting to see at least 2 of these, and he sees that at least 2 of these has riders. So if he now finds out as well about Seasmoke and his alleged rider, he is going to be furious, because obviously now, you know, he realizes that even though Daeron's dragon has now taken the wing, he realizes that Rhaenyra has Syrax, Caraxes, Vermithor, Silverwing, Moondancer, Vermax, and Seasmoke. So they're largely outnumbered, and we see some of his solution to that in the trailer for the next episode. So obviously we're going to go through that probably tomorrow. I'm like too excited to talk about it, but this is our ending scene, and all the dragons are screaming in chorus, and it's beautiful and wonderful. But can I just say, for everybody that's even alleging that this was for some reason a plan from Rhaenyra to try and provoke Aemon to come out and follow them to Dragonstone. Obviously it's not an ambush because she's not on Cyrex, and like none of them go after him, because he eventually does say to Vhagar to flee, and Vhagar does try and defy him twice until he like really says flee, Vhagar, and then she begrudgingly, you know, he has to throw his whole back into turning her around, and then she begrudgingly follows and goes back to King's Landing. But this would be the stupidest idea to try and provoke him to come out, because even though this is like the best shot that they have to try and target him, because, you know, Targaryen hasn't made it to King's Landing yet, Dreamfire is not being ridden by Helaena at all, you know, at this point, and Sunfire is still at Brook's Rest and condition unknown. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is the perfect point. They have the most amount of dragons that they've ever had to strike Vhagar, but obviously these are completely inexperienced dragon riders, which we've seen from Ulf literally nearly falling off the thing every 2 seconds that it showed a shot of him in King's Landing. So this would be such a stupid idea, because like if Vhagar had caught up with Silverwing, she could have just immediately lost another dragon and Dragon Rider. So this would have been so stupid plan wise. And I mean, they didn't do anything to Vhagar when Vhagar came out, and why would she want to show her hand early to end that she has a bunch of new dragon riders and dragons? None of that makes sense. So I think this is clearly just a joyride from Ulf, who was a bit tipsy, and like first thing he did whenever he hopped on his dragon was she was like, let's get out of here, I haven't been out of here in a while, and he just was kind of hanging on for dear life and going along with it. So I think it's the same kind of idea as whenever Aemon initially jumped on Vhagar and she took him for a ride. I think it was probably the same idea, or maybe he's psychically connected with her and made her go to King's Landing so he could show off to his wee friends. I really hope that there's some sort of discipline for this in the next episode, because this is immediately showing like this is the recklessness that comes with like having unexperienced dragon riders, and these are the risks involved, and like you could have lost another dragon and dragon rider so easy because you're just bringing over a bunch of random people and you haven't vetted any of these people. So I don't know, I think we need to confront some of that very, very soon. So hopefully that's addressed in the next episode, and if not, sure, at least we get a nice shot of Silverwing flying over King's Landing, and at least Daemon's a wee bit shook up. But he better stay away from Helaena. Anyway, so we're gonna look at the trailer hopefully tomorrow, probably tomorrow, and yeah, so that was episode 7, the penultimate episode of season 2. Can't believe it's nearly over. You're gonna have to leave me some video suggestions in the comments. People have already been doing that, and I've been very, very thankful. People are sending me down some really interesting rabbit holes, so if you have any really bizarre Song of Ice and Fire things, see especially like places, creatures, sigils, all these things, you know, if there's any particular theories you want me to have a nosy at and make a video on, I'm so down for any rabbit hole you want to send me on. Thank you for joining me once again, to all those who are revisiting and what's cracked about it's new. Hopefully I will see you all back tomorrow or the next day for the trailer breakdown video, and any other videos you want, leave them in the comments, have a conversation with me. It's always a good time down there, and thank you for watching.